Raj Patel adjusted his collar as he settled into his window seat on Flight 203, the weight of his military service medals carefully packed in his carry-on bag. Their cold, metallic presence was a constant reminder of the years he had dedicated to the service of two nations, India and America. At 42, his face bore the etched lines of someone who had endured both struggle and triumph. A man who had seen the darkest and brightest sides of life. Today was meant to be a day of celebration. Raj was flying home to surprise his mother on her 70th birthday, a long-awaited reunion after years of separation. The afternoon sun streamed through the small oval window, casting a warm, golden glow across the cabin. As passengers filled the plane around him, there was an air of everyday routine. A young mother wrangled a restless toddler into a nearby seat, offering a weary but kind smile. Across the aisle, an elderly couple exchanged polite nods, their serene demeanor a stark contrast to the quiet storm brewing in Raj's chest. He checked his watch, thinking of the joyful moment that awaited him. It had been over 15 years since he had moved to the United States, joined the Army, and had been consumed by the life of a soldier. His visits back home had grown fewer and farther apart. Today, however, was different. This trip was an opportunity to reconnect, to surprise his mother and reclaim the simple joys of family life. In his bag, nestled beside his medals, was a carefully chosen gift, a beautiful silk sari he had picked out with love for his mother. Raj smiled softly as he pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his sister, who was in on the surprise. On the plane now. Keep Mom busy tomorrow afternoon. He hit send, feeling a sense of anticipation build inside him. The thought of his mother's reaction when she saw him standing at her door filled him with warmth. But that warmth was suddenly interrupted. Flight attendant Lisa Matthews walked down the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin, and when they landed on Raj, they narrowed ever so slightly. She paused in front of him, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Sir, I need to check your bag," she said, her tone stiff, almost rehearsed. Raj looked up, his confusion evident, but his demeanor remained calm. "Of course," he replied, his voice polite as he reached for his carry-on. "Is there a problem?" Lisa's response came quickly, but her words carried a sharpness that made the passengers around them look up. "It's just routine," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "We've had some security concerns." Raj's heart sank. He recognized that tone, that look. He had faced it before, but it never got easier. The subtle, almost imperceptible judgment that followed him wherever he went. Still, he remained composed, unwilling to let his emotions get the better of him. "My bag is regulation size," he said, his voice steady. "I made sure to check it before boarding." The young mother in the row ahead glanced over, concern etched across her face. Her toddler, sensing the tension, stopped fidgeting. The elderly couple exchanged uneasy glances, their peaceful demeanor now replaced with quiet discomfort. Lisa's voice grew louder, her words cutting through the growing unease. "Sir, I need you to comply with my request immediately." Raj took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He could feel his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice soft. "I am complying," he replied, a touch of weariness in his tone. "Would you like to see my military ID as well?" But the mention of his service seemed to agitate Lisa even further. Her expression hardened, and without warning, she stepped back, reaching for her radio. "Are you threatening me, sir?" she demanded loudly. Her voice echoed through the cabin, and in that instant, every conversation, every murmur, fell silent. All eyes turned to Raj, and he could feel the weight of their gazes. He, a man who had served two nations, was now facing an unexpected and unjust battle. Raj stood firm, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest. "Ma'am," he began, his tone calm yet resolute, "I am not threatening anyone. I'm simply trying to understand what the concern is. I'm happy to cooperate." By now, other flight attendants had joined the scene, moving toward them with brisk steps. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, and some began pulling out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding before their eyes. The young mother gripped her child tightly, her eyes darting nervously from Raj to the flight attendants. The elderly couple exchanged whispers, their faces marked with quiet outrage. Lisa spoke into her radio, her eyes fixed on Raj with suspicion. "I need security at Gate 12. We have an uncooperative passenger. Possible security threat." The words hung in the air like a slap to Raj's face. His carry-on, his medals, those cold, silent reminders of the years he had spent protecting others, linked softly in the bag. The irony was not lost on him. A man who had fought for dignity and honor, now reduced to being treated as a threat. The tension in the cabin mounted as moments passed in agonizing silence. Minutes later, the heavy footsteps of airport security officers echoed through the plane's narrow aisle. From the window, passengers could see 3 uniformed officers approaching the aircraft with determined strides. Raj, now fully aware of the storm that was brewing around him, straightened his back. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his resolve had never been stronger. This wasn't just a security check. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a battle for his dignity, for his honor, and for his right to be seen for who he truly was. A man who had served his country, not a threat to anyone. As the officers reached the door, the tension in the air was thick, and Raj knew that no matter what happened next, the outcome would shape the rest of his journey. Lisa stood by her post, her face firm and determined. Raj stayed calm, following the training he had received in the military. The young mother sitting next to him quietly pressed the record button on her phone, capturing everything that was happening. The first officer stepped into the aisle, his hand resting on his weapon. Behind him, 2 more officers stood with serious faces. "Sir," the lead officer said, his voice stern, "stand up and come with us." Raj's voice remained calm. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. "I'm happy to explain what happened." But the officer interrupted him. "Stand up now," he ordered sharply. "This is not a discussion." Lisa, who was standing nearby, added, "He was being aggressive when I asked to check his bag. I felt threatened." The other passengers began to whisper to each other, their disbelief growing. The elderly man across the aisle finally spoke up, his voice shaking with anger. "That's not true. We all saw what happened. He was polite the entire time. He didn't do anything wrong." The officers ignored him. One officer grabbed Raj's arm roughly, pulling him into the aisle. "Stop resisting!" the officer shouted, even though Raj had not moved at all. "I'm not resisting," Raj replied, keeping his voice steady. "I'm cooperating fully." But the officers continued to pull him down the aisle. Passengers took out their phones, filming the whole scene. In the struggle, Raj's military ID fell out of his pocket and clattered to the floor. Lisa watched quietly, and her earlier confidence began to fade. She seemed unsure now, starting to question whether this was really the right thing to do. From the back of the plane, a voice called out, "This is wrong! He didn't do anything!" Raj was pulled off the plane and out into the cold jet bridge, surrounded by officers. They patted him down, checking him for anything that might pose a threat, but they found nothing. Inside the plane, the passengers were upset. The elderly couple, the young mother, and several others who had seen what really happened started to demand answers. Some passengers even began to leave the plane in protest, saying they would never fly with this airline again. Hours later, Raj sat in his sister's living room, exhausted and still shaken from everything that had happened. His bag had been returned to him, but now it felt like nothing mattered. The medals and the silk saree he had bought for his mother's birthday seemed unimportant. He held his medals in his hands, but they felt heavy, a reminder of the injustice he had just faced. The beautiful saree he had chosen with so much care lay beside him, still wrapped up, untouched. Raj looked out the window, feeling a mix of emotions. He had served both India and America, thinking that his sacrifices had been for freedom and justice. But now, those very ideals seemed to have been challenged. Even though this battle had shaken him, Raj knew that his fight for dignity wasn't over. Raj's phone buzzed incessantly, each notification a new wave of attention to the incident that had unfolded just hours earlier. The messages, the calls, the social media alerts, they were relentless. Videos of what had transpired on the flight went viral almost immediately, and with them came an outpouring of outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForRaj, #RespectOurVeterans, and #NeverAgain trended worldwide. Veteran organizations, civil rights groups, and public figures came together, united in their condemnation of the mistreatment he had suffered. It was impossible to ignore the growing movement, one that demanded accountability and change. The airline, under mounting pressure, issued a statement deeply regretting the incident. Yet, their words felt hollow in the face of the fury ignited by the viral videos. The apology was too little, too late. The storm had already begun, and nothing short of true change would appease the voices calling for justice. As the media coverage intensified, "My son served with honor. He sacrificed for this country, and they cannot treat him this way. We will fight. This is not over." Her resolve was unshakable. Her son had ignited a movement, and she would stand with him every step of the way. The next day, Raj stood at the front of a makeshift stage set up in his sister's front yard. The crowd gathered around him was a mix of veterans in uniform, community leaders, and passengers from Flight 203, each person drawn to the cause not just by solidarity, but by the belief that something needed to change. They held signs, their voices rising in unison, demanding respect for those who had served their country. As Raj took the microphone, he looked out at the sea of faces, each one a symbol of the growing force that was behind him. He began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yesterday, I boarded a flight to surprise my mother for her birthday. Instead, I was humiliated, harassed, and treated like a threat. But this is not just about me. This is about every individual who has been judged by their appearance, every veteran who has been disrespected, every person who has been denied dignity simply because of who they are or where they've come from. We deserve better. We demand better." His words didn't just echo in the yard. They resonated far beyond. His story became a rallying cry for thousands across the country, igniting a dialogue on discrimination, respect, and the rights of veterans. Airlines nationwide began revisiting their policies, making sweeping changes to ensure better treatment of their passengers, especially those in uniform. Diversity training and cultural sensitivity courses were mandated across the industry, a clear shift toward understanding and inclusion. The airline responsible for Flight 203, in a desperate attempt to redeem itself, launched a new initiative. They established the Flight 203 Future Leader Scholarship, a fund designed to support the children of veterans who had been affected by service, to help them pursue higher education and leadership roles in society. It was a start, but Raj knew that real change would take more than just a scholarship. Raj's story reached new heights when his medals, which had once hung unnoticed in his closet, were displayed prominently in a civil rights museum. There, alongside his military honors, lay the silk sari his mother had sent him, a powerful symbol of his heritage and the dignity he fought to preserve. The juxtaposition of his uniform and the sari spoke volumes about the intersection of his identity as a soldier and as a son, a man of honor who stood for both his country and his roots. 1 month after the incident, Raj found himself once again at a podium, this time standing outside the headquarters of the airline. Behind him, hundreds of supporters had gathered, a testament to the momentum the movement had gained. Among the crowd were the young mother who had shared his pain, the elderly couple who had witnessed the injustice, and, of course, his own family, standing proud beside him. "My mother taught me to stand up for what's right," Raj said, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they had all been through. "And on Flight 203, passengers stood with me. Together, we showed the world that dignity and respect are not privileges. They are rights. Rights worth fighting for." As the crowd erupted in applause, Raj's thoughts briefly drifted to his mother. That evening, they would finally celebrate her birthday, a moment of personal joy amidst the public battle. When she draped the silk sari over her shoulder, her smile was warm, but her eyes held a quiet wisdom. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the best gifts aren't the ones we plan for." Raj's journey was far from over, but in that moment, he knew he had already made a difference. The incident on Flight 203 had sparked something much bigger than a moment of injustice. It had birthed a movement, a collective call to action that showed the power of standing together against hatred and inequality. Raj had become a symbol, not just of resistance, but of hope, of resilience, and of the enduring fight for dignity in a world that often forgets the sacrifices made for freedom. Flight 203 was no longer just a flight number. It was a milestone in the ongoing fight for justice, a reminder that change is not something that simply happens. It's something that people make happen together.